Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Cyrus awakens in the Glade, a sheltered commune deep in the forests beyond the old city. Alive, but confined to the woods, how will Cyrus respond to the newest twist in his adventure? Find out next on the Seventh Valkyrie. At the center of the Glade, there was a decently sized food pantry that was pretty well stocked, and it was encouraged to share any food that you grew, foraged, fished, or caught. Presumably you could eat whatever you wanted, but Elva, who managed a lot of the affairs around the Glade, also tended to set out a little spread of different fruits, vegetables, and options for each meal. For breakfast today, there were dried hardy mushrooms, thick oats and well water, and a rainbow selection of different fruits, vegetables, and berries. I threw together a bowl and sat down with my breakfast just as two wild women finished eating theirs. With a nod of acknowledgement, no one around here was very chatty, I continued to the simple stumps and logs that made up the dining area, as they headed off towards, well, whatever people got up to around here. Nearby was a big board of chores, where Elva marked down tasks that needed doing. And people did them when they had the time and the ability to help out and do so. Once I'd had my first bowl of food, I poked over to the chore board and stood, spotting a few new placards up that I hadn't seen the day before. Cleaning, maintenance, organization, handiwork, and food-related chores I all recognized from yesterday. But on the bottom, there was a free space with scrawled letters reading, Life Lab. It was unmarked, which meant that no one had volunteered yet, and it also had a plus sign next to it, signifying that there was some amount of physical labor required. That sounded like a good thing. I could use some physical labor to take my mind off of everything going on here. Now I just had to see if I was allowed to go there. I filled up another bowl of food and sat around eating it and waiting. Eventually, I surprised a Sestran coming in for breakfast by speaking to her in exactly her own North Sea regional dialect. But after that brief burst of confusion, she did point me towards the Life Lab, which was down a path at the southeastern corner of the Glade, away from the ocean and squarely in my safe zone. With a little bubble of excitement, I tentatively scrawled my name on the board, dropped off my dishes, and made my way towards the forest, eventually steering onto a footpath between the trees that I'd missed the first 2 times I'd walked by. From there, along the path, I went deeper into the woods, and though it wasn't far, by the time I had followed the trail over 2 small creeks, the Glade had nearly faded from my second sight, swallowed up by the sheer wildness of the forest around me. But I could sense a bundle of energies further down the path, and I forged ahead, wading through thick bushes to break through into another clearing, where the trees parted to welcome the late morning sun. The little creeks that had accompanied me on my walk fed into a small stream, which ran straight through an encampment nestled on the edge of a lush canyon. The stream continued over the edge, where spilling water splashed down in pools along terraced gardens and rolling ridges, all full of striking plant life and the powerful energy of raw nature. Taking in a deep breath, I suddenly felt healthier. All around, I sensed creatures skittering and sliding and striding and scampering, and prancing and flitting and flying and flocking, and digging and diving and dining, from razor hawks and feathered serpents to tromping tricolor salamanders and troops of pinstriped pizotes. Hey, you here to help? Wait just a second. I turned, searching for the voice, then raised my gaze up a dozen yards to the trees, where 2 life weavers glowed green as they manipulated the thick branches of a tree into position under an enormous treehouse. That was all being done under the watch and instruction of a 3rd woman, with a massive braid down to her waist. Under the braided woman's directions, the 2 life weavers maneuvered and strengthened the tree branches until the treehouse held steadily up in the canopy. They then tested that by climbing, jumping, and swinging on it until they had determined it was stable. It was only when they started leaping through the trees to get down that I realized that there was no ladder leading up to the treehouse, or any form of pathway at all. But to the three of them, that wasn't even a slight concern. And in about as long as it took me to descend a decent set of stairs, they had finished their acrobatics and touched down on the ground. All three women were wiry and slight, which made sense. I imagined every ounce of extra weight could be a problem when you jump through the trees like that. And it was clear from the moment they hit the ground that the long-haired woman was in charge, at least to some degree. Taking just a moment to dust off her hands, she approached me with a friendly smile, reaching out a hand while the two Uveran lifeweavers held back, eyeing me suspiciously. "Hi, I'm Cyrus." "Marianne, but most people around here call me Misty." "Is that your real hair color?" Yeah. That's all natural. Eyes too. I get some weird questions about those." "Huh. Well, I'll be. What do you make of them, girls?" The two lifeweavers didn't move any closer, and instead just started talking in hushed whispers. Misty turned back to me. "Oh, they're just shy. Hako, Para, get over here and introduce yourselves." They were still hesitant to approach, and when they did start to walk over, they did so cautiously, stopping about 10 feet away from us. "Now, Cyrus, you don't have any gifts active, do you?" "I don't have any myself, not even sensing, so you'll have to forgive me for asking." "Oh, no, I don't think I've got anything active. What could be, I'm not from around here, and I have been told by other people that my energy can be a little bit weird and foreign, so maybe that's throwing them off a little bit." "Huh. Well, where exactly are you from?" I'm sorry, I have been told not to say. There are, things are complicated." "Oh, mysterious." "Well, guys, I know he's weird, but we've had weird people before. This is Cyrus, and he's going to help us out this morning. Y'all girls okay with that?" The two of them looked at each other, then looked at me, then looked at Misty, and nodded, then walked straight in the other direction, presumably to do something else. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a bother. If I'm too much trouble, I can go back and find another person. I'm sure somebody else would be able to come help." No, they're just a little too used to being out in the wild. It's healthy for them to encounter new people here and there, especially when they're working in the life lab." "So, I'm kind of new to the Glade." Well, that seems to be so. "So, what exactly is the life lab?" "It's incredibly beautiful, and I can see all these buildings and structures, and I can feel really good energy all around here. I just feel it. I can breathe it in." Sense. So you said you've got the sense too? Well, I can't say I'm not jealous, but people like you are actually crucial to our work. Now, we work together, and a lot of our efforts actually rely on half-breed schlubs like myself who don't have a gift. But I'm glad to have somebody who can see things in a different way." "You don't seem like a schlub to me." "Okay, Cyrus, I'm jumping in here, but I really love the word schlub. Schlub, 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 schlub. Don't you just love that word? It's a great word." "Yeah, it is a funny word. I agree." I hadn't realized that my conversation with C had overlapped with a conversation that Misty thought she was having with me, so I had accidentally cut her off halfway through her sentence. But she just laughed and moved on. "You know what? Yeah, it is kind of a funny word. You can see why I use it. Now back to your question. Were you listening? I saw you get that far off glance people who are sensing kind of get. Is that everything okay?" "Oh, Yeah, I have a tendency to kind of talk to myself. That's beside the point. What were you saying about the Life Lab? Ah, well, just like the name says, it's a lab to study life. Now, I'll dig a little deeper into that. It's a lab to study the wild, the gifts that we have, and trying to understand how our world works. It's partially about doing so on a sensing level, because people like yourselves, people like our life weavers, our wild speakers, the speakers to the wild women, however you want to call them, their relationship is such a vital key to how we understand what happens around us. But we have to figure out how to communicate and pass that on to people who don't have those senses. That seems like a pretty important job. What kind of things do you study around here? Oh, all kinds of things. Just there, when we were up in the trees, we were working on our roost for Mox, who's our storm rider condor. We're pretty sure that they can either detect weather patterns or outright change them on their own. So that's a pretty powerful skill to be digging into. Now, down in the canyon, we have a nesting clutch of florigons that we're studying. You know, the way they output not just energy, but also fundamental nutrients, that is fascinating. Chell, friend of mine, is working on pinstripe piezotes to try to understand their intertroop communication structures. You see, you can start a fire in one part of the forest, and before the smoke has even covered half that distance, piezotes on the entire other side of the forest will already know about it. We don't know how that happens. We want to figure it out. Granor, another friend of ours, is even studying Brinspor, if you can believe that. Now, they are dangerous, vicious, and violent hunters, but also a cornerstone of the ecosystem because of how many relationships they have with their territory. And we're trying to understand how we can follow those relationships to understand better health about what's going on. You know, and so on and so forth. There's a bunch of other projects, but I'm sure you don't want to hear more about those. I, in fact, did want to hear more about those. With each creature she mentioned, it was like new forms jumped into my head. Like the names that she was saying were giving detail to the little blobs I could sense out in the woods. I must have been grinning because then she stopped and got a huge smile. Ah, looks like you found the right place to be then, Mr. Cyrus. Now come on, there's a lot of odd jobs to do around camp, and it'll be a great way to introduce you. And so I followed her, offering a willing listener and a willing hand as we made our way across the canyon's edge, up into the trees on more accessible platforms, and finally down into the canyon over the course of the morning. Misty seemed happy to answer every question I could pose, and pretty soon our conversation had bridged from the projects confined within Life Lab to other aspects of life in the Glade. It was all connected. First, apparently the phrase, wild women, that I'd heard in the old city wasn't entirely accurate. They weren't all women, because men were happily welcomed in the Glade. And to hear Misty tell it, calling the people here wild women was just like calling everybody in Reen the city folk. It worked as a shorthand to set a distinction, but it didn't really capture the full picture. Some Glade residents simply enjoyed life outside the city. Some came through part-time, who were either looking for help hunting or farming for food in the region, and wanted to understand which populations were the healthiest or which adjustments their crops could use to thrive. Other residents of the Glade had chosen to step a bit further and lived in the half space between human and animals. It was sort of like the Great Wolves, but without the transformations. Those people made the vast majority of their lives out in the wild, and only returned to the Glade on occasion for small moments of human connection or holidays or celebrations. Some people studied animals with an academic interest, like Misty, while others saw a connection with nature as a form of religious ceremony and meditation. That was more common among gifted people, Misty said, and that had launched us into a whole conversation about all the incredible things that gifted people could do. People like Hako and Para specialized in life weaving, gifts tied to the earth, the trees, and the plants, which was an enormous field of study. The Lifeweaver work done at Glade was peaceful, but Misty also told me that further south, beyond Edera, Freelanders had learned to manipulate trees and plant life for wartime purposes as well. The creation of deadly poisons, camouflage and stealth for hunting and tracking, using plant life as a living weapon, etc. and so on. Similar to life weaving was wild speaking, which was focused on animals, learning from them, communicating with them, fighting alongside them, commanding them, drawing from their strength, or even taking on hybrid animal forms, like the great wolves could. When it came down to it, though, Misty described life weaving and wild speaking the same as she might have described any other talent, like cooking or fishing or dancing or music or building and craftsmanship. Some people had one skill, some had the other. Some had a combination of both and specialized in one. Some people were uniquely doubly talented, and others had a sort of hodgepodge of skills. And then, of course, there were also people like Misty, and like me, or I guess not me anymore, who didn't have any, but she didn't seem to mind. And as the morning wound down, I was inclined to agree that she wasn't really missing out on anything. She wasn't even breathing heavy at the end of the 4 hours that we worked together, while I was dripping in sweat and practically crawling as we crested the canyon for the last time before heading back to the Glade for lunch. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to Archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.